Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday morning. We begin our show with the hush money trial of former President Donald Trump, whose legal fate is now in the hands of 12 jurors after closing arguments wrapped up yesterday.
Both sides made their final pitches to the jury ahead of deliberations, which are expected to start today. Mr. Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in what the state alleges was a scheme to conceal hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. They say it was aimed at suppressing damaging information in the lead up to the 2016 election. Mr. Trump denies those allegations. The prosecution accused Mr. Trump of trying to, quote, hoodwink the American voter. The defense focused on the credibility of Mr. Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, branding him, quote, the gloat or the greatest liar of all time. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is outside the courthouse for us, where he'll stay for quite some time, I'm guessing. Here on set, we're joined by our legal analyst, Danny Savalos. Good morning to both of you. Vaughn, let's start with you. Walk us through the main arguments made by both sides during yesterday's marathon session.
Right. Good morning, guys. Yesterday was a marathon. Extra innings here at the Lower Manhattan Courthouse. After 8 p.m., the jurors finally dismissed for the day. Over the course of nearly 3 hours, the defense for Donald Trump, Todd Blanche, really honed in on two key points. Calling Michael Cohen, the marquee witness, a liar repeatedly, by my count, at least 45 different times. He referred to Michael Cohen as either lying or a liar. And the second part was calling into question for the jurors the extent to which they have reasonable doubt that Donald Trump was intimately involved with the falsification of the business records, as well as an effort to influence the 2016 election. By consistently urging the jurors to think that they had reasonable doubt that he was the one that was orchestrating, causing the scheme, that is where the focus went for 3 hours. The prosecution then, for 4 hours and 40 minutes, took a different route. It was a methodical explanation of not only the documentary evidence, the circumstantial evidence, in the 22 witnesses that took to the stand over the course of 5 weeks, working from August of 2015, when that Trump Tower meeting between Michael Cohen, Donald Trump, and David Pecker took place, all the way through 2018, when the story became public and Michael Cohen ultimately turned on Donald Trump. They detailed in great detail for the jurors what led to this scheme and this conspiracy they say took place over several years to conceal these records in the payment before the 2016 election.
So Danny, Vaughn's just laid out a lot of what we heard. For you, what were some of the specific moments that you think would really resonate with a jury from both sides?
Evaluating closing arguments has to involve evaluating the burden of proof. The prosecution has to build a case. They have to prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense just needs to pull out enough Jenga blocks, you know the game Jenga, enough Jenga blocks so that the case topples. They don't need to build anything. So in the sense that a lot of people said Todd Blanche's closing was a little disorganized, it doesn't have to be perfectly organized, but it certainly helps. And I think that maybe the closing suffered from that. The prosecution, it is very easy for someone like me to sit here and say 4.5 hours. You've got to edit. You've got to cut down a little bit. But I'm not the one trying the case. And if you're trying the most important case, arguably, in American criminal history, you do not want to leave out any item that the jury might seize upon. That's how you get to 4.5 hours. And honestly, if I were in his position, I would probably do the same thing.
Now, it is in the hands of the jury. So, Vaughn, walk us through the next steps. What can we expect today?
At 10 a.m. Eastern this morning, that is when the jurors will return here to the courthouse. Again, you're looking at 12 individuals, 7 men, 5 women. None of the jurors ended up leaving the jury box. There were questions, right? There were 6 alternates that were ready to step in if need be. But those original 12 jurors made it all the way through this case. They will be given jury instructions by Judge Merchan. We expect that to take place over the course of about an hour. They're going to be told what relevant laws they are looking at and what their task is when they go in to deliberate on what the charges are that they will be finding either Donald Trump guilty of or acquitting him in. And so when the jurors then go ultimately to begin deliberating, we could look at either potentially hours or days, potentially weeks. They have as long as they need in order to make their decision.
So, of course, this is the big story right now when it comes to the legal challenges facing the former president. But before we do let you go, Danny, I want to switch gears to the classified documents case. A judge had denied a request from the prosecution for a gag order, though. This is after the Trump campaign had falsely claimed that the FBI had been authorized to assassinate him when they searched his Florida home for those classified documents. Help us understand this.
So this is not, in the federal system, it's not really called a gag order. It's a motion really made under what's called the Bail Reform Act, and it's that same statute that allows Donald Trump to remain out on bail pending his trial. So this is about really modifying pretrial release conditions. And while it may seem like a semantic difference, it is significant because the Bail Reform Act really does encourage the least restrictive conditions. But essentially, the bottom line is that all gag orders are controversial. All gag orders, there is an argument to be made that they should not issue because they balance a defendant's right to speak, his First Amendment freedoms, and arguably, as political speech, Donald Trump may have a superior First Amendment claim, although officially all First Amendment claims are equal. Then, on the other hand, you have the safety of course, the agents. And really, judges make a judgment call. And a lot of folks are complaining that, this is Judge Cannon is biased for President Trump. But look, when you are trying these cases, sometimes the judge goes in your favor, sometimes the judge goes against you. And as a defense attorney, it feels often that the judge is always going against you. In this case, it just happens that she seems to be deciding a lot of issues against the government.
Reminder that while we're immersed in one case, many more remain. Danny, Vaughn, thank you both for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we do. Let's talk about the political implications of this case now with NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, always great to have you with us. So how strong is Mr. Trump's support right now as this hush money trial heads to the jury? What kind of impact would a conviction have on support?
Yeah, some of the polling shows that this could end up having an impact at the margins. There was a national Marquette poll that was released last week showing Joe Biden with a 4-point lead over Donald Trump when respondents were told that the former president would be convicted of this trial. However, when half of the respondents were told that Donald Trump could possibly escape conviction, that ended up going to a 6-point lead for Trump. That's a net swing of 10 points. And with a lot of the people going back and forth being political independent. So this could really upend the presidential race. But it's also possible that it might not upend the presidential race, just given how polarized our country is and how very little other events have often moved what has been a competitive and consistent race so far.
Let's talk about what happened outside the courthouse yesterday. We saw actor Robert De Niro campaigning for President Biden, along with 3 D.C. officers who defended the Capitol during the January 6th riots. Here's a little bit about what De Niro had to say about Mr. Trump.
If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave. What does that mean? Is that the country we want to live in? Do we want him running this country and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm dictator for life?
The Trump campaign called him a washed-up actor. We should note he did get an Oscar nomination this year. But I want to focus on those officers, Mark. They're believed to be part of a broader strategy here. So how does the Biden campaign believe that tapping these officers will help him, especially in battleground states?
Yeah, this was the Biden campaign really leaning into the January 6th and democracy messages. And Joe, you were mentioning the former Capitol Police officers behind him, Harry Dunn, as well as Michael Fanone, 2 well-known figures in the January 6th proceedings against former President Donald Trump. And this is just all about the Biden campaign believing that arguments about January 6th, democracy, and litigating them are just as an effective campaign cudgels against Donald Trump as talking about the economy, immigration, and other issues.
Mark, yesterday, also the Democratic National Committee, we want to update our viewers on this, announced plans to nominate President Biden ahead of the party's August convention through a virtual roll call, is what it's known as. This is an effort to ensure that he appears specifically on Ohio's election ballot. Yesterday, we had a conversation here on the show about this special session going on there. Help us understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah, Savannah, this is a little bit complicated, so let me be really kind of quick and short here. According to Ohio law, President Biden ended up having to be nominated in early August to be on the ballot. But because the Democratic convention is happening after that in mid to late August, that there was real doubt from the Secretary of State from Ohio that President Biden would be on the ballot. And often this has been corrected with quick legislative fixes. This was not the case in Ohio. And what Democrats decided to do is say, hey, we're going to nominate Biden virtually first before we hold our convention to make sure that he can be on the ballot in Ohio. And that seems to have solved the situation.
All right, Mark Murray, thank you so much.
In the Middle East, Israeli forces continue to conduct airstrikes and military operations in and around the city of Rafah. Dozens of people were killed on Tuesday. It's the same area where airstrikes caused a deadly fire days earlier at a camp for displaced Palestinians, sparking more international outrage. NBC News correspondent Raf Sanchez has the latest from Tel Aviv.
Hey there, with Israel stepping up its military offensive in Rafah and Palestinian civilian casualties mounting, the White House is facing growing questions about what is President Biden's red line and has Israel crossed it? Now, the White House saying yesterday that they do not want to see Israel sending large numbers of units smashing into Rafah. But the spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, at one point asked, how many charred bodies does the president need to see before he changes policy here? The White House somewhat taking offense at that question, but it comes after there was just that firestorm ignited at a camp for displaced people early on Monday morning, a fire sparked by an Israeli airstrike. The IDF is releasing the results of an initial investigation into that strike, which killed at least 45 people. They are saying they used 2 small bombs to target Hamas commanders inside that camp, but that some kind of secondary explosion actually started the blaze. They are saying their bombs were too small, that it's possible that there were hidden Hamas weapons inside the camp. They have not provided any firm evidence of that, and an Israeli official earlier said it was possible that a gas tank exploded, and that's what started the inferno. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is confirming an NBC News report that the U.S. military has been forced to suspend the delivery of aid into Gaza by sea after its temporary pier was damaged in bad weather. The Pentagon saying it's going to take at least a week to repair that pier, which, remember, has only been operational for 2 weeks at this point. And that is another significant blow to the humanitarian effort inside the Strip. Back to you.
All right, Ralph, thank you so much. For more, we're joined now by Colonel Jack Jacobs. He's an NBC News military analyst and Medal of Honor recipient. Colonel, good to have you with us. So Israeli forces are pushing deeper into Rafah despite global condemnation really intensifying. We know Israeli tanks were seen entering central Rafah for the first time on Tuesday. What should we make of Israel's strategy? If this isn't a major operation in a very confined space, then what is?
Well, you know, you got to start at the end and work backwards. One should ask, what is Israel going to do at the end? And their objective clearly is to force Hamas to release the hostages. That's Netanyahu's under tremendous pressure inside Israel to do exactly that. And one can come to the conclusion very rapidly that Israeli objective is not necessarily to destroy Hamas, because it's extremely difficult to do. And even if they do, once they leave Gaza, it'll pop up again. It's supported by Iran. But in fact, to get the hostages released, that's what the pressure is all about. Recently, as a matter of fact, I believe as recently as yesterday, Israel proposed another ceasefire to Qatar and other intermediaries. And the question is, A, what's in the proposal? And B, how is Hamas going to respond? But we have to keep in mind that the continuing conflict works to the advantage of Hamas in the end. And at some juncture, Israel is going to have to say that it has completed the mission and withdraw.
Colonel, during yesterday's White House press briefing, we heard from Admiral John Kirby, the National Security Communications Advisor. He pointed out that the Biden administration mourns the losses, but says that that airstrike, the one that had that fire rip through that camp, does not constitute a major ground invasion into Rafah. Let's play a little bit of what he said.
We still don't believe that a major ground operation in Rafah is warranted. We still don't want to see the Israelis, as we say, smash into Rafah with large units over large pieces of territory. We still believe that, and we haven't seen that at this point. But we're going to be watching this, of course, very, very closely.
According to the White House, the majority of the damage caused by Sunday's initial strike was due to a secondary explosion, not the airstrike itself. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what does that mean in terms of thinking about Israel's strategy and how we are or are not supporting them when we see things like this happen?
Well, it would appear that that's correct, that there was one or more secondary explosions. But the idea of targeting even a specific target in an area where there's liable, if not likely to be, a great deal of collateral damage is fraught with danger. These were relatively small munitions, GBU 39s, it would appear, that have about 17 or 18 kilos of explosive each, targeted to eliminate one or more specific people inside the area. But it's a congested area. As long as Israel continues to do targeted attacks, even if they have collateral damage, the White House is likely to say that whatever red line they've established has not been crossed. They do not want to see large-scale, large numbers of IDF troops inside Rafah. To the extent that that's not occurring, we can see Israeli tanks, IDF tanks, not inside Rafah, but on the strip of land between Gaza on the north and Egypt at the border near Rafah, not going into Rafah itself. As long as that continues, the red line will probably not be considered to have been crossed.
All right. Colonel Jack Jacobs, as always, thanks for your analysis.
Let's get you to weather now. The spring seems to have brought a never-ending cycle of severe storms in one part of the country or another. Today does not appear much different.
Meteorologist Angie Lastman is here tracking the latest possible storms from the high plains to Texas. Angie, good morning.
Hi, good morning, guys. We've got a couple of spots that we're going to watch. Yes, unfortunately, more severe weather, but the good news is we're looking at a little bit of a lower risk when it comes to tornadoes. So that's always a positive. But here's the big picture look. We've got some cool showers that we're going to see across parts of the Midwest and the Northeast, thanks to a system that starts in Canada and extends south. And then, yes, we have the plains in Texas on tap to see some more of those strong storms thanks to another storm system that's going to emerge and leave us with all of those same kind of ingredients that make it a good kind of a day, an afternoon, and specifically evening for us to see some of those storms erupting. This is mostly parts of the northern plains, but stretching into the central plains. This is going to be something that we watch to really be the most impactful when it comes to wind gusts and maybe some large hail. The tornado threat isn't zero, but it is on the lower end. So that's, of course, a positive from today. As we look ahead to tomorrow, unfortunately, the South and specifically Texas, who we know has been hard hit so far this spring season, is going to be right in that same kind of area of concern when it comes to the slight risk for severe weather. So we likely will be seeing some flooding with some heavy rain possible thanks to these kind of ongoing showers. But we'll also see some of those same threats. The main threat's going to be the severe wind gusts, but the large hail and even an isolated tornado or two not out of the question. Notice Oklahoma City right in the middle of that, as well as Amarillo for tomorrow. By the time we get into Friday, we're starting to wrap up our work week. We're going to see now still, again, that chance for flood threat. Notice some of this heavy rain that we're going to expect with multiple kind of rounds of it working across parts of the South. So we'll be concerned with that here as we wrap up our work week. On the bookends of the country, looks quite nice, actually. Gorgeous day for most of the Northeast here as we get to Friday. We'll see maybe some showers for southern portions of Florida, but out west, it'll be sunny, but it will also be hot. Notice the triple digits that you'll you'll see across parts of the southwest, but it'll be the middle of the country where the showers and thunderstorms will be possible. And of course, that section of weather is going to be on the move over the next few days, and especially as we get into the weekend. If you're making plans on the East Coast for Saturday, looks pretty good, actually. We'll see great conditions. We'll be kind of on the more mild side, but pretty typical for this time of year. Plenty of sunshine, so make your outdoor plans now. We will see the storms stretch from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf Coast, and the shower and thunderstorm activity will be with us for your Saturday plans. But otherwise, a lot of sunshine out west, mild conditions for the Rockies. We'll be into the 90s across parts of Texas, so that could be a little uncomfortable for folks there. But otherwise, your Saturday looks pretty good for most of the country. And we keep it going for Sunday, really, along the East Coast. It'll be a beach day, guys. I know that's what a lot of folks want to hear, but still more storms in the forecast for parts of the southeast.
All right. Angie, thank you so much.
Got it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.